Hello and welcome to Let's Talk Impact with Dr. C, and I'm your host, Marix D. Seymour. Let's Talk Impact is about engaging urgent and sometimes uncomfortable topics relevant to ministry and that positively changes the lives of people. And what we discuss on Let's Talk Impact could make the difference between your success or your regret. Let's Talk Impact is intended to cause listeners to take an introspective look at how they approach leadership, organizational, and personal development for this season. Let's Talk Impact promises to ignite the big aha moments for pastors, for church leaders, for organizations, and even individuals who are responding to the call of God on their lives. So, pastor and church leader, I've got one for you. Do you ever feel like the congregation is not engaging at the level you envisioned? Think about this. Do you resonate or do you connect with any of these terms? Do they resonate with you, how you feel at the end of a ministry week? Listen, inadequacy, disappointment, anxiety, helplessness, confusion, isolation, fatigue, burnout, resentment. Any of that sound familiar? Do you know someone who's feeling like that at the end of a ministry week? If so, let's talk. So, an effective pastor is not only a spiritual leader, but also an effective administrator who brings order and organization to the church's mission. Proficient administration ensures smooth operation of the church activities, including services, events, and outreach programs. And strong administrative skills help the pastor focus on their spiritual duties, leading to a more harmonious and mission driven congregation. Now, the intent of a pastor's role in leading discipleship and preaching and teaching and administration is impact. I'll say that again. The intent of the pastor's role is impact. And if a pastor or if pastors are successfully overcome the challenges that ministry is faced with today, and if they're expected to make positive impacts on communities, they must couple their preaching prowess with the ability to confidently lead as an administrator. So, one of administrative skill that's essential to effective pastoral leadership is the ability to assess the needs of the congregation and the community. And when a pastor is able to assess the needs of the congregation, ministry can be precise, resulting in evidence that programs and initiatives are relevant and addressing the spiritual, social, emotional, and physical needs of its members. However, when a pastor is unable to assess those needs, issues like inadequate pastoral care, misaligned priorities, and lack of community involvement and communication breakdown will arise. I can't stress that if a pastor cannot assess the needs of their ministry, and of their community, chaos will arise. So, in this episode, we're going to discuss and talk about the importance of needs assessment as a skill for pastors. We're going to talk about how to conduct thorough needs assessments, and then we'll talk about how this knowledge can inform and shape your ministry's programs and initiatives. So, understand this. Assessing ministry needs is a critical skill for the church pastor. I'll say it one more time. Assessing ministry needs is a critical skill for the church pastor. The pastor's ability to assess the needs of the congregation is essential for effective ministry, quality pastoral care, community engagement, relevance of sermons, and building trust and encouraging the overall health of the church community. And so you might ask, well, what is a needs assessment? Well, a needs assessment is a systematic process of identifying the needs of the church and the community it serves. Pastors should continuously develop this skill to determine what services and programs the church should provide. But also to ensure that the congregation that from the pastor's perspective, their needs are a priority. This process involves gathering data about the community, including demographics, economic status, and even social needs. The data gathered from a needs assessment can be used to develop strategic plans and programs that accomplish the mission of the church and meet the needs of the community. Now, implementing programs and services that don't meet the needs of the church and its community result in a waste of resources and diminishes the impact of ministry. Ooh, I'll say that part again. Implementing programs and services that don't meet the not only is a waste of God's resources destined for the church, but it also diminishes the impact and trust that the community will have in the church. And so I want to share with you, there are a couple steps to conducting a needs assessment. And this is just a high level conversation. We're going to talk about those steps, but it's high level, and each of them are intricate and important to assessing the needs of your congregation. And so the first step in conducting a needs assessment is gathering information. And you may hear others say gathering data or gathering evidence, but it's gathering information about your programs and initiatives. And you gather this information through interviews and surveys and observations and focus groups. And not only do you gather this information from the congregation, but you also gather the same information using these same formats, gather information from the community, and you gather information from other community partners that you already serve within your community. But the first step is to gather information about your ministry and its initiatives. Sidebar, please don't get offended by the information you receive. Please don't be offended by the information you receive. Step 2, after you've gathered information, then you want to analyze that information. And when I say analyze that information, what you want to do is to ask yourself the question, what does our mission statement say that we do versus what we're actually doing? And when you're analyzing this information, you're asking yourselves, are we doing what we said we would do, or are we not doing it? And again, you're going to include not only the congregation in analyzing this information, but you're going to include the community and community partners in this analyzing information. Understand that stakeholders who are not necessarily within our congregation show us our blind spots, those things that we didn't see, those things that we didn't intend to do, but we were doing it anyway. And so the whole idea of analyzing this information is to determine a performance gap. And when I say performance gap, I mean that distance between what our mission says that we are supposed to be doing versus what we're actually doing. That's the performance gap. And so step 2, after you gather the information, you analyze the information to determine what is the performance gap. Okay. And then step 3 is to brainstorm contributing factors. And there may be a myriad of factors that caused this performance gap that you discovered. That it may range from anything from the hours of ministry to the days of ministry. It could be anything from that the air conditioning is too cold, or it's too hot in the sanctuary, or that the outreach is on the wrong day. It could be a myriad of contributing factors. But again, you get input from the congregation, input from the community, and input from your community partners when brainstorming the contributing factors to your performance gap. Remember, the performance gap is that distance between what your mission says you're doing and what you're actually doing. All right. So you're going to brainstorm contributing factors that may have played a part in that gap and developing that gap. Then number four is going to be determine the root cause of the contributing factors. What cause? Again, there are going to be several factors, but there are going to be some major ones that stick out, and you want to determine what are the root cause of those factors. Now, be careful that you don't quickly give an answer right off the cuff. In determining the root cause, there are instruments and templates that will assist you in getting right down to the nitty gritty of why you're not performing where you say you should be, and why you are performing where you are. And I've talked with many pastors over the years about this performance gap, and when they did this root cause piece, they found that what they thought was the reason was way off from what really was. And so step 4, I encourage you as a part of the process is to determine the root cause of those factors that led to your performance gap. And so there are a couple of ways. Again, there are templates and models and formats that will help you determine what that root cause or what those root causes are. But one that I use in my trainings with churches and organizations is what I call OPP plus 1. Write that down, OPP plus 1. So that O is for organization. Sometimes organization hinders the mission of the organization. The way it's structured, the way it's put together, the way things are organized in the organization could be a hindrance and cause a gap between what we said our mission is versus what we're doing. So the one cause is organization. P is processes. Sometimes we have too many processes to accomplish the mission. Sometimes the processes are too complex to accomplish the mission. And so many times we create a performance gap because of our processes. All right. So there's organization that will cause a gap. There's processes that will cause a gap. And then there's people. Oh my, pause, breathe. People. Sometimes we have the right people in the wrong places, and vice versa. Sometimes we have people placed in situations and positions that cause a stop gate, that cause a halt in the operation and the processes. And so sometimes people caused a performance gap within your ministry. And I know many times we default to the willing workers and we default to whosoever will, let them come. But understand that people can cause a performance gap in your ministry, that people can cause you to be way out on an island, far away from your desired from your desired end, or what your mission for your organization is. All right. And so that's OPP. And someone might say, but you said plus 1. And so the plus 1 is when we choose to ignore OPP, when we choose to ignore that organization causes a gap, when we choose to ignore that our processes cause a gap in performance, when we choose to ignore that the people we have in place may be causing a gap, a performance gap, then we also have created another whole situation of why many times organizations will ignore what they do. And I think the definition for insanity is to keep doing the same thing, but expecting a different outcome. When you choose to keep doing the same things, when you choose not to change your organization, don't expect the gap to close. When you choose not to consider your processes, don't expect the gap to close. When you choose to keep the same people in place, knowing that they're not in the right position, not only are you doing a disservice to them, but you're doing a disservice to your ministry, to your congregation, and you are fostering a gap in its performance. And so again, determine the root cause of your performance gap. And so after you have determined the root cause of your performance gap, many templates and many models for the next step for improvement. If you're going to close that performance gap, if you're going to close that distance between what your mission says you're going to do and what you're actually doing, if you're going to close that gap, you've got to have some next steps. And so in the short term, using the information that you've received, you've gathered information, you've analyzed information, you've brainstormed some possible causes, you've identified a performance gap, you've identified root causes to performance gap. Now you want to think about number 5, the next step, determining next steps for improvement. And when you're determining these steps, whatever those next steps are, it produces 2 things. One, it produces a short-term plan. It produces a short-term plan, which then becomes your church's ministry plan for next year. Imagine that. In the short term, whatever your next steps are, that should be your overall ministry's action plans for the next year. And so when you're having your conference, your church conference meetings, your monthly church meetings, it should be addressing these short-term plans for closing the ministry gap. And then the second thing that this produces is the long term. It produces long-term plans, in that this is the impetus or the motivation for a 3 to 5 year plan. And that's a lot more detailed, and we'll talk about that in one of the next sessions. But it produces the foundation for a 3 to 5 year plan, where you really dig in, not for just the now, but for the long range. And so let's just kind of go back, and I want to remind us again of what those steps are. And so this is for pastors who want to hone up their skills as an administrative pastor, who knows that gosh, we do need to do a little bit better with this needs assessment, determining what our ministry needs. The 5 steps are: gather information, analyze information, brainstorm contributing factors, determine what the root cause is for those contributing factors, and then determine the next step. Now, just as important, pastors and church leaders must understand the impact of their ability to assess the needs of their congregation and the community. By accurately assessing the needs of the congregation and the community, a pastor can tailor their messages, their programming, their initiatives to be more relevant and engaging. And understanding the specific challenges, questions, and interests of members of the congregation and the community helps the pastor to connect more deeply and foster a sense of belonging and a sense of shared purpose in the organization or in the ministry. Effective assessment of needs builds trust and connection between not just the pastor and their leaders, but the pastor, the congregation, and the community. And when members feel heard, watch this, when members feel heard and understood and supported by the pastor or church leaders, it strengthens the bonds with the church community, and it creates a sense of unity and oneness. And more oftentimes, the one thing that congregations yearn for, scream out for, will protest about, is a sense of unity. When a church, a community feels like their needs are being heard and their challenges are being understood and then being responded to, it creates that sense of unity. And so the needs of the community, the pastor can also experience a personal sense of growth and development in their own pastoral role. And it allows them to then to deepen their sense of empathy. It allows them to sharpen their leadership skills. It allows the pastor to cultivate a greater sense of purpose and fulfillment in the ministry. And so you might say, well, Dr. C, how can a pastor hone or develop their ability to assess the needs of their congregation and community? I'm glad you asked. And here's my answer. 1, engage with the community. When we talked about those surveys and focus groups and those observations, engage with the community to identify the most pressing issues and their needs. And by engaging with the community, you then develop an ear to hear what the need is. But then also you want to collaborate with community-based organizations to gain a better understanding of the challenges facing their community. Again, you start developing an ear to hear, but you also see the work that's being done. Then you get to determine what other gaps can you fill in the ministry or the work of the church. And then finally, I want you to invest in your own development. Invest in your own development as an administrator by engaging with a needs assessment coach or an organizational coach. Invest in your own development. And so, in my preacher voice, as I go to my seat, passionate pastors' ability to assess the needs of their congregation and community is crucial for building strong and supportive church communities. By actively listening, engaging with pastors, and staying attuned to the challenges and the joys of congregation and community, pastors can better serve and foster a sense of belonging, a sense of connection, a sense of spiritual growth within the church community. As church leaders, continuously develop your administrative skills. Doing so is key to leadership, leading and sustaining a relevant ministry that deeply impacts the congregation and impacts the community. And so here's your next steps. Write a note, make a phone call, read an article about conducting needs assessment. Determine your own level of being able to assess the needs of your ministry, but then continue to, wherever you are, continue to develop that skill. This will help you overcome frustration, inadequacy, guilt, and disconnection. You'll see the fruit of your labor and the growth of and the sustainability of your congregation. Thank you so much for joining me to talk impact with Dr. C. Follow me on all your social media platforms at Let's Talk Impact. Comment when you get there. Comment, let us know what you like and what you'd like to know more about. We're working on something for pastors that we believe is going to be a benefit to their ministries, and your input is going to be greatly valuable. And so join us next week as we discuss another skill, strategic planning. Next week on Let's Talk Impact with Dr. C, it's going to broadcast every Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. So until next week, what you do has far greater impact than what you say.